Hi, I'm Monica Kim. Welcome to a special 1-hour Planet Parent. Geek, nerd, the weird kid. Every schoolyard has a couple. The kids on the fringes who play alone and have obsessive interests in, say, astronomy or insects. It's painful for these kids who just don't fit in, and for their families who aren't sure how to help. But we are now learning that this kind of behavior could be a sign of a kind of high-functioning autism known as Asperger syndrome. Thousands of adults may have grown up with Asperger's and not known it. It's tough to diagnose and wasn't even defined until the mid-90s. Today's Planet Parent looks at the impact Asperger's can have. 8-year-old Scott knows there's something different about himself.
Sometimes I get really interested in something and then I can't stop playing it. Oh, yeah!
Isaac's symptoms can look a lot like typical bratty behavior.
I hate smart.
These kids are smart enough to know they're socially awkward, but they can't control it.
I can never give direct eye contact to a lot of people for a certain length of time. Like, I could probably give it maybe 3-4 seconds, and I have to look down again.
And we read it up and said, she doesn't suffer from autism. This can't possibly be right.
Danny's 30 now, and he's still struggling with the syndrome and finding his way.
You know, I have to think twice of how I come across with people.
And scientists looking for a cure are still defining the disorder.
We don't know anything about the disease. It's a black box. So how can you properly design a drug if you don't know what you're designing that drug to?
What did Michelangelo, Albert Einstein, and Glenn Gould have in common? Well, besides being smart and gifted men, they may all have had Asperger syndrome. It's an intellectual disability that science is just beginning to understand. Symptoms include obsessive interest in arcane subjects and difficulty socializing in an acceptable manner. Kids with Asperger's look like everyone else, but their disorder makes navigating life harder for them and for their parents.
All right, everybody good? Buckled in? Yep, seatbelts on.
Inside this van is a very unusual backseat driver.
If you go east on the 400 at the 89 exit, you're not on Highway 89, you're on County Road 89.
Oh, they changed it to County Road, you're right.
And then
This is one 8-year-old who will never take a wrong turn.
there's no traffic coming in the other direction.
Scott is obsessed with maps.
South, Plank Road. Turn the page. Here's Haldeman County Road 3 and Highway 3 is north. They never get boring. I just have a special interest in them.
All I have to do is ask my son where John Street is, and he can tell me exactly, how to get there. Not just, it's on the north end of Bradford, or it's, you take this street to this street.
So Holland Street, then where do we go on Holland Street? Do we go east or west? Do you remember?
East.
We go east to...
The Four Corners.
And what street?
Scott's brother, 7-year-old Stephen, shares this all-consuming passion for maps and directions.
And it's impossible to go north on Simcoe because it will be buried.
Oh, so Barry...
Their favorite book is, the map books. The Toronto and Golden Horseshoe book is his favorite. And my husband brought home one from Business Depot, the 2004 version, and you'd think he'd just got a new Game Boy by his reaction. It's like, the 2004 map book, this is awesome, Dad. And that's where their fascination lies right now.
Scanlon Creek is at the 9th line.
I thought these kids are geniuses. I have no issues here. But, it was the other developmental skills, the social skills, and the communication skills that weren't progressing with the same speed as the others.
These brothers are comfortable with the certainties of north, south, east, and west. It's the world of social interaction that they have trouble navigating. And in conversation, they're all over the map.
I can get bored with things easily. Sometimes I get really interested in something and then I can't stop playing it. I also like ice cream, and I like to drink 5 Alive and Fruitopia. Those are my favorite drinks.
And the kinds of visual clues the rest of us rely on during social interaction are lost on them.
The eyes have it. One of the important clues as to the origin of this impairment in social reciprocity is in face processing. What we're learning in some recent research is that individuals with Asperger syndrome, but similarly individuals with autism, do have difficulty processing information from the face of another person.
Is it a real town or is it an imaginary town?
Imaginary, as usual.
Both boys have been diagnosed with high-functioning autism, which a lot of experts say is just another name for Asperger syndrome.
Scott, can I add something else to your map, please? It's going to be...
Symptoms of Asperger syndrome include intense absorption in certain subjects, little or no ability to form friendships, one-sided interaction, lack of empathy, obsession with order and routine, clumsy movements and odd postures.
You have 2 chances tomorrow.
Children with the syndrome don't always suffer from all of the possible symptoms, but they always have trouble with social interaction.
Everybody's on board that this is a genuine syndrome and that it's associated with significant disability and a reduced quality of life. Not everybody is agreed on what it means, whether it is in fact a high-functioning form of autism or whether it's a separate disorder or what. Whether it's the same or different is too complex a question because we don't really know what causes either autism or Asperger's syndrome, so we will never really know whether it's the same or different.
Dr. Peter Zotmari is an expert who closely studies Asperger syndrome, and he's come up with his own definition.
Well, I would describe it as autism without the language impairment. I think that's the simplest way to understand it. Take a child with autism, take away their language impairment, you'll have what looks an awful lot like Asperger's syndrome.
Here it comes.
Classic autism is something the Turner family knows all about.
Hi. Hi, guys.
Stephen's twin, Katie, is autistic, and it's hard to understand her.
Hi, black shirt. Black shirt? Who's got a black shirt?
Yeah.
Was I wearing a black shirt this morning? Did I change? I changed my shirt. Now I'm wearing a pink shirt like Katie.
So I'm gonna add another ball.
Stephen and Scott's disability isn't immediately apparent to the people they meet. And that leads to problems interacting with their peers.
My boys don't know, or didn't when they were younger anyway, if somebody didn't want their attention, that wasn't always obvious to them, and they'd just keep coming and following them around and talking to them. Sometimes they'll just keep talking and talking and talking to somebody, and the person won't want to talk to them.
You're out.
One out, but...
Even figures of speech are difficult for them because they take things so literally.
I think that was a homer. I was driving in the car the other day and my son was asking me about something, some fact he needed clarification on. And I told him that I wasn't quite sure. It wasn't on the top of my head at the moment. And everything went quiet in the car. And then a few seconds later he says, "So is it on the bottom of your head?"
Okay, everybody ready? There was a girl, and a boy,
The kids ask them, sniff this, and my kid goes ahead and sniffs, or touches or pats or does something that really, it's inappropriate in a schoolyard, and other kids understand that socially that's not appropriate.
An example of when he was in JK was there was another kid who was standing beside him with his pants kind of pulled up pulled up around his leg like that, and the teacher said, "Pull down your pants," to the child beside Scott. And Scott just pulled his pants down because he thought she was talking to her, and he didn't understand the environment, and he didn't understand that you just don't do that in public. He just followed instruction and didn't think about it.
This is a shell fungus. My brother found it on the ground one day.
If they don't do something right, or if they're not fitting in, they know they're not fitting in. They may not know how to correct that, but they know they don't fit in. And there's a lot of anxiety around that as well, which of course makes them great victims if they're afraid to approach other kids.
And sometimes if you can eat it, but if you eat the wrong one, you can have your pupils grow wide, vomiting, stomach aches, everything you don't want.
They can interact with more people, so people might see them more frequently as a bit odd or eccentric or different, and then reject them or criticize them or tease them as a result of that. So their better language ability brings them into contact with a wider circle of other children, but at the same time that can be more difficult for them to cope with, and they can be hurt as a result.
If it's on the ground, don't eat it if you don't think it's healthy.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Now have you learned a lesson?
Oh, yeah. So everyone's learned a lesson tonight.
Yeah.
Don't eat fungus.
I think that is the thing that has made it difficult, is that these kids are bright, they have good language skills, and their social interaction problems are rather subtle. And their unusual interests are also can be rather subtle. Some people refer to them as little professors.
Is it time yet?
Is it time yet?
Even without social skills, Stephen and Scott are very smart little boys, but they have a hard time focusing on anything beyond their own particular interests, so learning is difficult.
You know, they will select, one thing, and it might be a thing of interest to them, and they'll know everything about that one thing to the exclusion of everything else. And that makes it very difficult for a teacher to try and teach a student.
The boys are getting special attention in school and are starting socialization therapy in the hope it will help them in the future. As Asperger's kids get older, they have more difficulty relating to their peers, no matter how hard they try. Depression, stress, and anxiety can set in and make life unbearable for these kids and heartbreaking for their families.
All right. So the first one, I've got a couple here. One is Paula.
Meet Margot Nellis. She runs the Asperger Society from the back of her kitchen in Toronto.
Into the membership files, their phone number, and just let them know that their email's not working.
It's her way of taking charge of a syndrome that has been wreaking havoc on her family life since her first son, Zach, started talking.
I guess he was about 18 months. And up until that point, he'd only spoken 3 words, and they were all in Spanish. And one day, he just came out to me in the kitchen and said, "Yeah, by the way, Mom, grab me that box up that's on the refrigerator, please." And I was like, what? No, you only speak 3 Spanish words. That's not right. What? That and his inability to connect. Only he ever was comfortable with family, so myself, his dad, my mom. Anybody outside the family, he wouldn't connect with at all. So verbally, eye contact, was very withdrawn. And actually at 8, he really tried to hurt himself. And that was sort of the beginning to our finding the diagnosis, was his attempt to hurt himself. And he basically wanted to die. And he was 8.
Zach's 12 now and seems like any other kid. On the inside, though, he's working hard to keep his symptoms under control, and it's a constant struggle.
Being a disappointment, that gets me sad. Like, if I accidentally do something in the house and it's like ruin something, then that makes me a disappointment. That gets me sad and mad sometimes, but usually sad and like down. But I don't really cope with that. I don't know. that's what gets me sad.
He went through something very similar last year as well. Full clinical depression, suicidal, self-injurious behavior, except for he was cutting himself with razor blades then and smashing his head through walls and that sort of thing, which was equally as distressing. You know, he was 11.
When I first found out, I was like, oh, now there's a name for it. Oh, now it's worse. But then after a while, I'm just thinking, you know, I don't have Asperger's. I'm just like everybody else. I don't really care anymore. I don't really think you should have a name for it. I'm just different. I don't really care about it anymore.
Like, how do you deal with this? The depression alone. So then depression, Asperger's, suicide, you know, this is my life, I don't want it. These sorts of comments. Barely able to get him out of bed. Come on, buddy, get your socks on. Come on, let's go to the video store. Let's do, you know, anything to entice him. Did not want to be part of life.
Isaac.
But we were able to get him through it, which was great. And he's doing really well this year.
In my clinical practice, I see lots of kids with anxiety and depression. At times, we are clear about the cause of anxiety or depression. Kids may be struggling with things at school. They may be subject to bullying at school. They may have done poorly in a test or an exam. But sometimes the cause is less clear. We often find that kids develop an awareness of their differences over time, and that becomes a source of stress, anxiety, and certainly may cause some depression.
Okay, I'll give you a hint for the story. The story is that there are several different characters and they're mutants.
X-Men.
I didn't stump you. Oh,
You said mutants.
That was too much of a clue, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, your turn. Okay.
Margot also worries about her youngest son, Isaac. He's 6 and was diagnosed with Asperger's 3 years ago. Like Zach, he's got amazing verbal skills.
Brother Bear.
Oh my gosh, how did you get that from that clue? Oh, there was a no.
He's great at word games, but like the Turner boys, has a hard time talking to people.
Ah, yeah!
Especially when there's a camera crew around.
I'll turn into the Hulk smash. Wait 1 second, I'm doing something. Don't zoom in on me.
And he's emotionally volatile and prone to meltdowns.
Well, like, let's just say he's had a bad day. He comes home and he can get off the walls like crazy for nothing. Like, you can be sitting in like the wrong chair and he'll just like freak out. Or if he doesn't get his way, a lot of the times he just like explodes.
I should
Want me to do that again?
Ah!
But he's cute, so.
Rebecca doesn't have Asperger's, but it's made her life really difficult in a lot of ways.
If I was just bringing Isaac to the park and then suddenly he decides to have a meltdown or whatever, and other kids look at him like he's some kind of weirdo, and other parents look like he's being spoiled or something like that. It's pretty weird. It's pretty hectic sometimes. Things can get pretty out of hand. It's hard. Let's just put it that way. I guess the reason why they get a lot of the attention that they do is because they have Asperger's syndrome, but like, I don't think there would be anything else. Like, if they didn't have it, then we'd all pretty much have like equal attention, and I know they need it, but sometimes it would be nice to like get the attention that they do.
Margot understands her daughter's frustration.
She often feels like she's not part of the team. She'll often isolate herself in her room and just be up there. The nature of the way the guys are, the boys are, you know, they may fight, they may interrupt, they may be in her face, they may say embarrassing things to her friends. And more so because they have an awkwardness. They really just want to be part of it, but they don't know how to move in like some other, you know, person might move in quietly. They just sort of, they're there. And she gets very, very frustrated.
I think siblings are faced with a lot of stress when they have a sibling diagnosed with Asperger's. I think often problems start before a diagnosis when a family and a sibling are all unclear about why the child is behaving in a certain way. And a diagnosis really provides an alternate explanation for their behaviors and a context in which to understand their behaviors in a more helpful way. Well, I think many siblings of kids with special needs generally are used to their sibling having, lots of attention, more doctor's appointments, always seeing specialists, and obviously not as much attention is placed on them.
We have to go. Are you taking it? Yes, I am.
And all that stress is going to have an impact on the parents, too. Dealing with the kids has put a strain on Margot's marriage.
It can be quite, very stressful. Very, very stressful. I mean, Charlie and I have come to... Charlie's Rebecca and Zachary's stepfather and Isaac's natural father. And we've certainly come to points where we've been thinking about separating. Just because we're on very different pages about how to handle, of course, because I eat, sleep, breathe Asperger's just by nature of what I do. I tend to go overboard in the trying to figure out, was that an Asperger thing? And, whereas he's just much more reactionary and was raised in a very strict family. And, the fear of God, and his aunt is a major in the army. So, he has that sort of sense to him that I don't. That's a Chemosaurus.
Or see if they do it.
Making sense of Asperger's is a challenge for doctors and scientists. Answers may lie in the DNA. Researchers believe it's no coincidence that families often have more than one kid with Asperger's or traditional autism. At Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, the hunt is on for the syndrome's genetic source.
So which candidate genes are we sequencing now?
So this is one of the candidate genes that's on chromosome 7 in the Q31 region.
If you look at families that have more than one autistic child, it occurs about 6 to 7% of the time. And that's 100-fold more than you would expect if it didn't have a genetic component. So clearly now we have very, very good evidence, and that in at least 90% of cases or so, there's probably a genetic contribution to Asperger's and autism. This is a pretty good sequence.
Yeah, it's a very good sequence. This is typical.
Dr. Steve Shearer says they're getting close. Answers could be about 5 years away.
So the parents have nothing to blame here. These are combinations of genes that have been passed on from generation to generation. There may be environmental influences, but really it depends on the genes that you inherit. And we now have very good evidence that there may be up to 20 or so or more genes involved. So it's not that you're inheriting one gene from one parent. I mean, it's the father's fault or the mother's fault. It's probably a combination of genes that are leading to the development of this developmental disorder. We're not 100% sure if the same gene will cause Asperger's and the same gene will cause autism. Based on the family studies, it suggests that that will be the case, but it may also be the case that there is only one single gene that also causes Asperger's.
There's an 8 and there's a fifth concession.
In my experience, the families and the parents, they want information, they want answers. They don't expect solutions. They want to have more information because right now, everything they get has a question mark attached to it. And I really think that's the power of the genetics. The genetics is going to give us some definitive answers. Not all the answers, but some definitive answers.
Toys R Us doesn't have enough toys yet?
No, you have to go to
Once scientists have determined the causes of Asperger's and autism, they can move towards a cure.
Right now, at the present time, as you know, we don't know anything about the disease. It's a black box. So how can you properly design a drug if you don't know what you're designing that drug to? When you identify the gene, it actually tells you what's wrong with the cell, so then you can go in and actually try to fix it.
Scientists are also trying to understand why Asperger's affects boys at 4 to 10 times the rate as girls. One controversial and hotly disputed theory is that the syndrome is actually an extreme form of maleness, brought on by too much testosterone in the amniotic fluid during pregnancy. Asperger's does affect girls, and they feel even more different because of it.
I feel like I don't belong. I feel like I'm just from like another world. I'm like an alien that just came out of nowhere, and they're like, oh, she's different, let's stay away from her. So they think I'm stupid, but I'm not. I'm actually quite smart.
Being a teen is often tough enough, but being a young woman without the usual social skills is brutal.
I get bullied a lot, and I get made fun of because I'm a little different than any other girl that I'm familiar with.
Kira knows she's sending out the wrong signals, but she just can't seem to get in sync.
It's hard because if I look at them for too long, I feel scared on the inside. I feel like I don't know this person. Just stop staring at them or you're going to cause trouble. Whenever I look down, people assume I'm depressed or upset, and I'm like, no, I just keep telling them I can never give direct eye contact to a lot of people for a certain length of time. Like, I could probably give it maybe 3-4 seconds, and I have to look down again, but not all the time.
And being diagnosed 2 years ago didn't make things easier.
Just like overnight, it was, well, you know, what is it I've gotten? You know, as if it was really bothering her. And of course, she couldn't fully understand what it was. And even though we kept reassuring her that she hadn't changed from the 2 days before, but she just took her a long time
to
come to grips with it.
Matter of fact, we had to have some counseling for her regarding that in order to, I guess, get her confidence back up again and make herself feel better about that. And also to bring her back into reality, because that's the other thing that is more so with Kira. I'm not sure with all the rest of the AS people, but occasionally she'll go off into her own little world.
Her own little world.
And we have to drag her back to Earth.
Kira is one of a very few girls that have been diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, and that makes it even more difficult.
It is unusual for girls to have it, and we're not sure if it's how we've dealt with her or not, but we have seen other girls. There was a little group that we discovered, Aspie Girls group.
Aspie Girls, yeah.
And even Kira couldn't put up with them. Just the energy and the lack of restraint.
Yeah. Because also, the other thing, because all of the literature is saying that there's more boys that have it, and that was bothering her too. So when we found this Aspie Girl group, I said, great, you're not the only one. There are other girls. So we went to it a few times, and she just found that she didn't really fit in with them.
I know another girl that does have it. She's 3 years younger than me, and I hardly talk to her anymore because she's younger than me, and it's hard to cope with it because I'm the only one that, besides my other friend, that has it, and it's hard for me to cope with it because I don't have very many friends, and they won't say if they have it or not, because if they do, they're gonna eventually get made fun of.
So Kira tries her best to come to terms with her disorder on her own.
Trying to understand it day by day and trying to understand why I'm more different than people know I am.
Her parents are trying to find another Asperger support group for her. Kira does get some special attention at school, but she's still looking for answers. Kira's diagnosis came late, but for some, it doesn't come at all. That's because Asperger's has only recently been recognized as a disorder, and it's hard to nail down a diagnosis. There's no physical or chemical test for it, and experts rely on interviews with kids and parents. Researchers say there's probably thousands of kids and adults who have Asperger's and don't even know it.
I think it's certainly a very significant concern that there are a lot of adults out there who do have Asperger syndrome that aren't being recognized. They might have another diagnosis. For example, I think some people with chronic schizophrenia actually might have Asperger syndrome. Some people who are thought of as having obsessive-compulsive disorder and haven't responded to treatment also might be individuals with Asperger syndrome. There's some homeless people that I think have Asperger syndrome as well and aren't being recognized. So I think there's a whole population.
Just go wipe it down. Give it away. Once I put the soap, you wipe it down.
Danny Kelsey, 30 years old now, was an Asperger's kid who nearly fell through the cracks.
Yeah, I don't want to spray you. I'll try not to spray you too much. It's very difficult because they didn't know about Asperger's until a few years ago, so they saw a normal-looking kid acting abnormal. There was an issue because people wouldn't understand, like, the fact that, you know, if I'm doing things at school or whatever, like, why is this happening? And we had lots of people try to talk to me, but, you know, they weren't understanding what the problem is. So there was a lot of frustration on both parts, on the teachers, students, and also with myself. And a lot of times they would make fun of the issues.
Danny had a lonely childhood, not a happy childhood. He would be as frustrated with himself and then with others, and going to school, not doing well, after school not doing well, not having friends. You can imagine how you would feel if no one wanted to be with you, other than family.
Even when kids are running in the playground, I never did that. I kind of just stayed by myself. That kind of stuff, you know, you missed out on a lot of that stuff because, you know, you didn't understand what the behaviors that you were doing, and so people would just move away, so you would just spend a lot of time just on your own. Like if you're in the sandbox, you wouldn't go with the other people. You'd go on your own. Just purposely stay away from them for a while and just kind of, you know, because you knew you might be made fun of. You might do something wrong, so you just kind of spent a lot of times away. It works great. This is how it works.
His father struggled too, not sure what Danny's problem was.
It filters the water so it'll just dry it.
Danny did appear to be a normal boy. You couldn't see any abnormalities. And the challenge, he just, you know, behavior and not being able to stay on task and disruptive to other folks around, the other kids. And didn't seem to be any discipline that we would put in place would help rectify it, and in some cases making it worse. And so the concern then is that, you know, is it permanent? Is it something we'll outgrow?
Answers eluded them for years, and Danny was misdiagnosed.
The primary one was the hyperactivity, which seemed to be a popular one back in the, I guess it would be the late 70s, early 80s, that everybody was labeled if they were a little different and from a behavioral point of view, was hyperactive. And so one of the remedial items to help out was the Ritalin pill, which we regret very much giving that to Danny because it's an absolutely wrong thing to do. And it would slow him up.
The reason for it, it felt good when we went through it. I said
there was a lot of mistakes made in bringing Danny up that when you look back on it, I feel badly that we didn't make some of the right decisions at the time, and that if we'd known what it was and what to do, Danny's life may have been easier at the time, but we didn't. So Danny had to suffer through, I think, more of the loneliness and frustration than he would have had to had we known, and then we could have had interventions in place that would have helped the situation.
Finally, when he was in his teens, Danny was diagnosed with Asperger's. Unlike today, there wasn't any available socialization therapy when Danny was younger, so it was up to his parents to teach Danny how to get along, and up to Danny to learn.
You know, and I sort of refer back to the some of the teenage behavior where there's an awful lot of self-interest, but not a lot of awareness of how other people feel and how what you're doing affects other people. That those are things that you have to point out to Danny. He doesn't just have a look at somebody or watch the look on your face or listen for the tone in your voice and go, I think somebody's maybe not happy with something that I've done or said. You have to tell him, for the most part.
This approach has been working. And for the past 10 years, Danny's worked in the mailroom at the bank where his father's a vice president. Hired under a workplace equity program, his boss and co-workers know about his disability and make allowances for it.
Then why don't you take that box over to BMO?
Okay.
While you're there, after that, come and do data.
Okay.
Okay? He's an individual that is responsible for his run. We have to keep an eye on him, to be honest with you, because we have to monitor the situation when he's going on his run. Double check all the mail.
Sure.
You know Mary Ann Watson and everybody, so.
Oh, yes, I know that.
He's pretty consistent with his run. It's just putting mail away down here. I have people checking up on him just to make sure that everything is in place before he goes upstairs.
Check on the list there.
What's his name? Doug
Jones, yeah.
Like, we'll be joking around, throwing shots out, and he'll go on something about your mom trying to joke, but it'll just be like, came from left field, and he wasn't even in the conversation. It's just that little thing that tweaks you, and you're just like, Dan, like, get out of here before I get really ticked off. And he usually listens, and he does come up and apologize later on, but you got to tell him when he's ticking you off and he says little comments like that, you just got to tell him to leave you alone and get out of your face for a little bit.
Sure you will.
No, just looking at it.
Danny admits every day is a struggle, and he's still learning.
Morning, Norma.
Good morning.
I have this letter here. It's yours here to sign. Some of the challenges I have are controlling certain behaviors. Like sometimes you sometimes talk a little bit too much, or you're interrupting the conversation to talk, and you're not realizing that you have to wait till the person finishes.
Appreciate that.
All right. Have yourself a good morning. See you later on. You know, I have to think twice of how I come across with people, more than the average person may not have to do that as much. So that's really what I really feel is the difference that has to do. I have to make sure that I come across the right way with somebody, that, you know, not offending them in any way.
How was your evening last night, though?
Danny's determined to be just like everyone else, and he's found a very supportive spouse. He and Lisa met at church. 3 years ago, they were married.
Where's James? Where's James gone?
And now they have a new baby boy named James.
I have this. You want to feel something soft? Yay, bumpy.
He is more relaxed with his environment. He's more, he gained confidence about how to deal with people and how to react properly. Although once in a while, he is more like monopolize the conversation. But sometimes I keep on telling him, don't keep on talking. You let other people talk. It's a two-way traffic.
She'll tell me afterwards. She won't tell me then, but she'll tell me afterwards. Look, you know, maybe you can correct that. And each time that we do it, we get better and better. And that's how we've kind of really corrected things. It works to correct things that work too, because it worked as social events too. So it's been quite a good experience that way for me to learn to correct the social things.
Look at you. Look at you. Look at you.
Dan is really a very loving dad. And I keep on reminding Danny, you have to stay focused and be a good example. And James is so crazy about him.
James.
Yeah, every time he comes home, then as if I'm not existing anymore. Everything is Danny, because Danny is so, there's still kids in him, so Danny kind of, he plays with him, talk with him. They play together, and James loves him, really, yeah.
Yum, yum. Yum, yum.
We're kind of thinking of how to explain Asperger's to him when he's younger, or when he gets older, to be able to understand the Asperger situation, how it works, and this is what, your dad has that. So we're going to kind of thinking about ways to explain it to him when he gets older, because he's going to need to know some things.
Mommy Bella? Yes.
Daddy Bella?
Yes, you are. Where's the baby? I'm going to get the baby.
I wouldn't want James to go through what I went through, and as far as the high school, it's a long time to get to. When I'm 30 now, it's a long time to get to that, so I wouldn't want him to go through that. Wouldn't want to watch him to go through that if I could. We would help him, but I wouldn't want that for anybody, because it is a very difficult thing to control. if you don't learn from the very beginning how to control it, it's very difficult on you. It's hard. It'd be nice, though, to have James growing up soon, actually. He's growing nice and big, eh?
Danny's also planning for the next move, leaving the apartment in his parents' home and getting his own house.
Then you're going to have your own room once we have our own house.
He'll have his own room.
Yes.
Around and all of it. We're hopeful that everything works out with that, actually. That will be in the next little while, so we'll have our own place completely separate from Dad, so we'll have to take care of things on our own.
It'd be different not having you live here, Dan.
Yeah, once in a while I'll come clean out the fridge once in a while or something.
There'll be some good and bad. It's going to be different because we've had that, and some of it's frustrating to have, but it's rewarding to have Danny around. And Danny brings a lot of joy to the world, and he's got quite a sense of humor, and he's helpful around here now. He helps.
Certainly looks after the car.
He looks after the car. He's focused on the vehicle, but it's going to be a sad day as well when he does move, and it'll be an adjustment for us.
It'll be good, and Lisa's looking forward to it too.
Today, if they're lucky, kids with Asperger's might end up in a program like the one in this high school west of Toronto. Here, school is specifically tailored to the needs of Asperger's teens, starting with something as simple as how the furniture is arranged.
I don't think that's the...
No, that's got nothing to do with it.
There are 4 rooms that are connected together, which means that we have a variety of spaces in there. And the creation of the home base, which has, actually it's like the feel of a little apartment with the different connected rooms, it becomes a more personalized space for them. It's a place that they know is home for them during the school day, and they can come there to distress whenever they need to. But there are planned periods of the day, too, when they are in that area, and they can use it to distress themselves. The major thing that we deal with on a daily basis is the management of stress. So many of these kids, I've seen the number, upwards of 85% of them, have secondary anxiety disorders, or they could develop secondary anxiety disorders. But stress is an ongoing thing, and stress can be caused in a number of ways. It could be the workload, it could be the pressure of social situations, and because everything in school is basically social, there's a potential for that building up on a daily basis.
Do you feel confident that you're ready to write about it?
Oh, yeah. Even though we haven't finished reading the book
For
yet.
Gordon Coyle, the program means he has a good shot at graduating high school.
It's going to be, I'm going to be writing a test on this, and it's going to be on part of my exam. I see myself finishing next year, and I will hope that next year I'm also going to try to prepare myself for college. I want to study some computer-related courses so it can help me for my video game design.
Then one morning, all the acutes know too, and his real reason for backing down, and that
he wouldn't have experienced the success that he has here if he had to go to in a normal or regular program for school. I'm sure there would have been failures in subject material. He would be very upset. He wouldn't be as happy a person as he is, nor as successful. And I'd probably be climbing the walls too.
He might be not even in school, though I think we would insist on some kind of academic skill development for him. But I think we would be having a very emotional child.
Yeah, my friend Brendan was funny, though, man.
Spafford?
Oh, yeah, Spafford was wearing tights. I'm not kidding. Spafford was on
When he first came here, he was a lot more anxious than he is now. Not as confident as he is now, and certainly not as social. I started to see him, observing him when he was in his grade 8 class, and I saw somebody who was trying to fit in, but not having an easy time fitting in.
What does it mean when you're committed to something?
Means you have to do it.
Yeah.
Teens like Gordon go to regular classes.
That's going to be at the top of his list.
Yeah.
But they get extra help in their homeroom base,
Go to your auto ones and just put summary study sheets on the top.
where there are 4 teaching assistants and 1 full-time teacher for 19 students.
Got your learning styles here.
And that means less homework.
So they're coming back in the next day, and they're not as stressed out as they would have been if they had to go home and work all night on homework assignments and then, come right back to school again.
That's it.
So we've got kids who are generally more positive about coming to school. When they come here and they're more positive about it, and we create an environment that encourages and allows for social interaction with a peer group, suddenly school becomes more like the normal school experience that we all had.
Mark, come on, slide, move along, get the ball.
Richard Hales knows all about how hard it is for these kids in a regular school environment. His own son has Asperger syndrome, but they live in another school district. Richard worries that his son may lose interest in school altogether.
He started off in our local school. We had a terrible time, just an awful time adjusting, and his anxiety just got out of control to the point where he spent 3 different stays in hospital from October up until just before Christmas. And it was a very traumatic time for all of us, but particularly for him. He's now in a different program, but it's not specifically an Asperger's program. And he's still struggling. He just doesn't feel that school is for him. He doesn't think that it's an enjoyable place for him to go on a daily basis. And that's the big difference. The kids here really do enjoy coming to school. I'm not saying that they enjoy it every minute of the time, but there's something for them to come to every day.
Parents like Richard Hales hope these programs will become more common. They see their kids need a chance to realize their potential and become more independent. Something Gordon Coyle's parents look forward to.
Take our time getting through high school and do well at that. Go into a college program and hopefully take that at a slower rate as well. We're going to allow him to live at home after he's graduated for a while. We'll give him his own quarters in the basement so he has some independence. And when he's ready, hopefully, I really do expect he will live on his own someday. He's going to have a cat. He's already told me that. And he has plans for himself for the future. That's actually the one thing he loves to talk about the most. And he has lots of thoughts about what he wants to do, is what he's going to do in the future. So he's got plans, and I think he'll accomplish them.
So everybody's going to head back to their classes now? Yeah. Okay.
And that's the hope of every parent with an Asperger's kid, that they'll be able to find their place in the world, live independently, and have a happy life.
It's my greatest fear that she won't be able to do any of that. Not that I wake up screaming at night, but it's almost like that.
You know, because that's what you want for your kids. You want them to see them, leave home, have a job, and live, a fulfilling life.
I try and stay positive most of the time. If you don't, you're going to get buried. I try and look at every day as opposed to looking into the future.
The issue about whether individuals with Asperger syndrome can live a normal life or not is a complex one. Perhaps a normal life ain't all that it's cracked up to be. And what is normal anyway, and who wants it? Can they live a happy and rewarding life? Can they have a good quality of life? Absolutely. No reason why they can't.
Okay, here we are.
And that's Danny Kelsey's attitude.
Here, Dan, why don't you go up and get the door?
Yep. Another door has opened for him.
There.
The one to his first house.
See, James? See your new place? Took possession yesterday. We did it on our own. We looked at the place, we found the place basically on our own. We did a lot of that.
There's some work to be done in here with the hardwood that...
Yeah, even though you're only a few doors down, it's just something about just you're on your own. So it'll all be fixed up.
You're only going to be 8 doors away. There's still the opportunity to come home and graze.
And borrow the lawnmower.
And borrow the lawnmower. But, the house needs some work.
There's some stuff you can start today.
Yep.
5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that Danny would have been out on his own. And it's really only in the last 2 or 3 years where we've felt that we might get there.
Is that rhubarb right there, or what is it?
Where?
What is all that?
I had resigned myself that Danny be with me for the duration, and now coming to the realization that he's not. So it's a happy day.
Little leash going back and forth on the... I think it's basically symbolic because we have our own place. I have the child, I have the wife for quite a while. I'm able to look after the place on my own without having to have Dad living right there or finding out what we need to do.
Yeah, we'll trim it back so it's not overgrown.
We're going to move in once all the renovations is done. That's what it's like in the basement wonder.
Oh, let's go down and have a look.
We're providing some help. Danny is not escaping the debt. He will have to, he's going to be paying for the house. And he's excited about that. He's just going through the process of having to go and get a loan, something that he's not done before.
It's going to be an adjustment because we're used to, being home. We have, certain flexibility with bills and different things. So there's not going to be that flexibility with the bills anymore. Some parents with people with Asperger's, they get scared of letting their kids go because they're afraid of failures or whichever, which they shouldn't be. They should let them fail or whatever they need to do to get to growing up. So that way they can get on their own because parents are not going to be around forever.
He's been allowed to make the mistakes that people learn from, and but still with that ongoing guidance and support. And I think you really have to have that combination.
And maybe he'll give us a recommendation where to drill the hole for the... Who knows how far Danny can progress. We'll just keep going the way it's going.
All things are possible if you just learn that you have a problem. You have to be able to deal with it. Learning to deal with it, learning to control it, a lot of things like that will really help.
As Danny Kelsey is proving, it's possible for someone with Asperger's syndrome to improve their social skills and move forward in life. In this case, a lot of help from his loved ones has made all the difference. I'm Monica Kim. See you next time. If you'd like to contact us at Planet Parent, check us out on the web